Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So as I've been saying, this is the Shabbat where we read of the transition of our ancestral generations. And so we have to take a moment and just talk about Avram and Sarah, our first visionary ancestors, and what it is that we see going on. And it seems that mostly it's about God and Avram. That most of what we hear in the Torah, most of what we see is the testing that's going on between God and Avram constantly. And Sarah seems to be twisting and turning to accommodate everything that's going on with her husband and God in the spiritual journey that we're all watching very closely. And when we look at it and we see, well, how is Sarah actually? What is she contending with? And the very first thing we realize is she's going to have a baby in her 90s. So I think everyone can relate to when she says, seriously? I mean, my whole life I waited, now? And she has that moment, and we all feel that moment. It's joyous, but it's bittersweet. She's in her 90s. And so she needs to reconcile all of that. We also see twice she's going to end up in harems. And this is going on again because they have to leave the land because the land has droughts. The land God promised, this wonderful land, keeps having no water in it, and they need to leave. And she's the one who continuously ends up in harems over and over again. And in one time, when they're headed over to leave the land, and they're going to Egypt, and it says that Avram then says, oh, you know, you're very beautiful. I need to say you're my sister. And we're reading it, and we understand that he's panicked. She's panicked. She gives him permission to do it because they're going to kill Avram if they see Sarah's beauty. They're going to take Sarah into the harem, and they're going to kill Avram so she doesn't belong to another man, and hence there's no feuding going on. Quick solution, kill the man. If he's a brother, you pay the man. So this actually is a strategy that Avram is doing with Sarah's permission. And we're a little troubled by it. And the second time it happens, God steps in and says, no, don't keep doing this. And actually sets it up so that it will not happen again. But we're listening to thinking, now you see she's beautiful? You've lived with her most of your life. Now, because you're trying to see how other people are going to be looking at her, now her beauty strikes you. And we're thinking, where is the appreciation that we would have hoped would have been there the whole time together? Why is it only coming out now that he comments and recognizes on her beauty? And I'm sure she's noticing that as well. And then we've got the whole Hagar thing going on, where Sarah turns to Avram and says, I'm not having children. We've got this future with God. We need the baby. So here's my handmaid, Hagar. I've got an idea. Sleep with her. Sleep with her, and then I can enter covenant through the womb of another woman. It's a terrible idea. And it's actually going to cost this family enormously. But Avram listens to her. And then Hagar gets pregnant, lords it over Sarah. Sarah is furious with all of it, turns to Avram and says, God is going to judge between you and me. And we're thinking, between you and me? What happened to God will judge between me and Hagar? Hagar is the one who's tormenting her. But Sarah turns and says, it's not Hagar's fault, Avram, it's yours. And we're looking at that and we're thinking, but it was her idea. How is this Avram's fault? And then we understand that's a relationship moment. That's that moment when a wife can turn to a husband and say, no, of course, please, go out with your friends. Have a good time. Go to the movie. Enjoy. I'll stay home and do the laundry. To anyone who's heard that, I can tell you she doesn't mean it. This isn't a genuine idea. 9 times out of 10, the hope is that the partner declines it and says, no, why would I go out and have fun while you're actually doing all the work? But Avram doesn't decline it. He does it. And she's furious. And so she says, God will judge between you and me. Because her feeling is, you should have known to decline this offer. And so we watch them struggle with all of it, and ultimately, of course, the binding of Isaac, which we understand is that moment between God and Avram that Sarah will not survive. They survive it. Avram comes down off that mountain. Isaac does not get sacrificed, but Sarah dies because she can't. She's reached the limit. It headed to her child. And that for her was the limit. And so we lose her. And we lose her because of that moment that is a moment between God and Avram. And she is the one who actually is the one that we lose. When we look at their relationship, we realize that we don't often hear them speaking to each other. There seems to be a quiet dignity between them. There seems to be a communication without a whole lot of explanation that's going on between them. But the truth is, we don't often see just the two of them. We'll see them with God. We'll see them with the angels. We'll see them with Hagar and Ishmael. We see them with, but we don't often just see them. And that's a very crowded relationship they're having. The moment that they step into this larger vision that will change the world, their relationship gets very crowded. And it's not ever again going to be just about the two of them. And so in this week's Parsha, as we're told that Avram loses Sarah, we're told he eulogizes her. And the Midrash steps in and says, what does he say? I want to know what he says. And the answer is Proverbs chapter 31. That's what he says, Eshet Chayil. And the words of Eshet Chayil, when we look at that, and we understand that it's always translated to us as a woman of valor, a woman of strength, that's not a good translation. And I'm going to talk in a moment about why and what would be a more accurate translation. But the moment we name it that, then we look at it and we see, wait a second, the stereotypical ancient world portrait of a woman. She manages her home, she takes care of her kids, she takes care of her husband. This is an Eshet Chayil. It's traditionally said and has been said at the funerals of Jewish women. So that a eulogy isn't read, Eshet Chayil is read. And today, many women are responding negatively to it and saying, it's too confining and constricting. What do you mean that the portrait of a Jewish woman is to stay home, take care of her kids, take care of her husband, make sure the meals are good, make sure the household is running, and then when the woman dies, that's what we're going to say about her. Wow, she really had that house running well. And so many women are saying, I don't want Eshet Chayil. I don't want to go near it anymore. And now we look at it and say it starts with the translation. Eshet Chayil, the word chayal, we know that word. That word means soldier. That word means warrior. So we're actually not saying she's a woman of valor. We're literally saying she's a warrior woman. And now everything is very different. We look at that and we get into the words of what's being described by this warrior woman. What are her attributes as the text is telling us? First of all, she's trustworthy. Then it goes on and tells us she's an expert in textiles and imports. She's a land developer, it tells us, because she assesses properties and knows which ones are good and which ones are not good. She's an excellent team manager because she oversees everyone else who is executing all of these visions that she has. And then it steps in and says, by the way, make sure to remind her that she should benefit from all the good works of her hands, that it should not only be for everybody else, she should take a moment and benefit from the deeds that she does. It goes on and tells us she finds extra strength and stamina for everything she needs to do. Oh, and by the way, she's also philanthropic, so that it isn't simply about all the gain and the gain, it's about the broad gain and being able to share with everybody. She protects her children and her household. It's not she takes care of them, she protects them. Her partner gains stature in society because of her. She carries herself with dignity. She knows that joy sustains everyone, so she expresses her joy whenever she can. She grounds herself with Torah study. Grace and beauty are superficial, it says, and she knows that. She knows that it's the relationship with God, the core and the spirituality, that actually will build the foundation that we all want. And then it concludes and says, every woman of Israel is a warrior woman, but you exceed them all. That's a powerful eulogy for Sarah. And then when we hear that in the ancient text, and we realize this was all being said about a woman before the Middle Ages, before the Enlightenment, before the age of technology, before globalization, and before the world village. If we step back in time before any of those things, the ancient Jewish world has told us of the enormous potential that sits in every woman. There's a midrash that talks about what happens after this moment. It says there's a sage that would go around Israel searching for the graves of our ancestors and the graves of the people and the kings and everybody who came before us, trying to find them. There's one sage going around, and he comes back one day and he says, I found the cave, this cave, the one we read about today, Ma'arat HaMachpelah, the double cave. He says, I found it. I found the cave of our ancestors. I found the tomb. And they said, really, what did you see? And he says, I saw all of our ancestors. And a vision came to me, and I could see how they are lying for all eternity. And they say, how are Avram and Sarah lying? Because that's what we're interested in. How are Avram and Sarah lying? And he says, Avram is cradled in her arms. Avram is looking up at her. Every Friday night, households honor the women of the house with Eshet Chayil, reciting and singing Eshet Chayil to the woman. And Jewish women have taught each other what it is to be this thing. What does it mean to be this warrior woman? For generations, we embrace the portrait of this ancient song. Ultimately, it sits with the first Jewish woman. It sits with Sarah. And with all of her struggles and all of the twisting and the turning, Avram insists, I will own the piece of land that she will be buried in. He does not bargain, he does not haggle, he does not argue. He turns to the owner and says, what's your price? And then immediately purchases it. Insists on owning the land, because Sarah will be the first Jewish person to be buried in the land. That's what we do with warriors. And her body will eventually merge with the land. And so when the land feeds our children, she is nurturing all Jewish children forever. Once that happens, that's our land. And no other land will do. Avram and Sarah are securing it, and he's doing it now. In fact, when we understand that this is what's going on, and we hear the power of it, the importance of it, and the image the sage told us of how they are lying together for all eternity, as she cradles Avram, protects him, guards him, he looks up at her with respect and with dignity. You can almost hear him saying to everyone, have you met my Sarah? She's my warrior woman. Shabbat shalom.